All right, fantastic. Let's go ahead and kick this off. So, today we're going to be talking about OOP and we're going to be running a quick review of OOP utilizing the school exercise assignment, or excuse me, the school interface assignment. I like to draw things out. It helps me think better and it also helps me to visualize all the information. I am a visual learner, so for me, it's very important to actually have some sort of drawing board too. Even if it's just boxes inside of boxes or circles, it just helps me visualize everything. So here's what we're building. We're going to be building a school menu called Richmond High for the student interface. So here's the welcome, Richard. Your access level is principal. All right. What would you like to do? For this challenge, we'll be building a simple interface for a school that will keep track of student records. There are many ways to create the functionality we're looking for, and you should feel free to experiment beyond the scope of this tutorial. We'll be using the menu above as a guide. By the end, we'll be able to see a list of students. All right. So it tells me that there is a class for school, there will be a class for student, and one for staff. I'm quickly reading through this. I'm sure we all already read through this assignment. And I'm assuming we're going to utilize CSV Reader to get these list of dictionaries coming in. All right, perfect. Let me go ahead and take a look at my data here. So my data is pretty straightforward. I have some name, age, role, employees, and passwords, which from what I can see in the school interface, there's really nothing related to staff. Um, which maybe there's something we can add, such as a hey, log in, and then depending on who's logged in, they can see the information. I think that would be a nice way to implement staff, but we'll worry about that towards the end. First, I'll make sure that all the student functionalities are there. So in reality, the main class that we have to worry about is going to be students, building out students, and then being able to relate to this menu. Okay, so this is the main menu that I have to worry about. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to bring that over to my appropriate files. So let's see what we have. Currently, I have a class that I will be naming school that lives inside of school.py. So I'm just going to go ahead and actually write class of school. And I want this class of school to have my information formatted as such. Great. And I also have a class of student where there may be multiple or many student instances. Now, when I make the connection between these two, I have to realize, is this a connection of is a versus has a, right? So is a school a student? It is not. So that tells me that my relationship between these two classes should be composed from composition, right? They are not absorbing one another. The school just holds instances of the class of student. All right, perfect. Now I am going to kind of clean up my directory here. I'm going to make a directory named classes where I'm going to store all of my classes. And I'm going to move the school file into said directory. Oh, I'm in the wrong directory. I apologize. All right. Let me check what branch I'm on. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to make my directory name classes and I'm going to move my school into classes. Now, inside of classes, I'm going to go ahead and create a student as well. So student.py, which is going to exist inside of classes. All right, so now classes should have school and student. I'm going to start off from my school. I'm going to say class, school. I can see here that it's trying to help me out, so I'm just going to go ahead and put that to sleep. I'm going to make my init method, which is going to take in self name. And this is going to assign self.name be equal to name. And finally, I'm going to go ahead and have a menu, which is going to be a formatted string that holds the contents from the README. All right. And this should be self.name. Let me go ahead and turn this into an F string and set this to some parentheses there. Awesome. All right, so currently my class has an attribute of .name, but that's not necessarily the way I want it to be, because as of now, any sort of value could be passed into this class and it will be able to initialize automatically. All right, if I go into my runner and I do something like school is equal to, and I say from classes dot school import school is equal to school1, and then I execute my runner. So let me go ahead and print school.menu. When I execute my runner, we can see that the runner shows one is interface, right? And we don't necessarily want that. We actually want to receive the name of a school. We could even annotate this to just be school. So let's define this a little bit. This should return a string, or this should accept a string. And what it's going to return is going to be an actual instance of the class of school. So I can annotate that as well. Okay. Now I'm going to come over to my menu. And since what I'm accepting, I want to make sure that it is a string. I'm going to go ahead and set that up, right? I'm going to set a property called name. And this is going to be my getter, which will simply return self.name, or excuse me, self.underscore name. And then I'm going to declare a setter for said getter, where this is going to receive a value. I am then going to ask if the value that I'm receiving is a string. Actually, I'm going to go with not. And if it is not, then I'm going to raise a value error stating this value or name value should be a string. Okay, otherwise, I'm actually going to set the name property. I'm going to state name, or excuse me, I'm going to state self dot underscore name is going to be equal to the value that is being passed in title format. And I'm actually going to also strip any sort of extra input that's coming in. All right. Well, that opens up my school class quite a bit. Let's go ahead and take a look at school to see what we're looking at now. So my school class now holds attributes. And it also holds properties, which are getters and setters. Now, what attributes does my school class currently hold right now?
Name and menu.
Nice. So currently, if I scroll up, I can see there is name and menu. Now let's go ahead and break that down. Menu is definitely one of our attributes. But what about name? This self.name, is that an attribute or is that one of our properties? Right? This is actually one of our properties because self.name with an equal sign is actually calling the setter, right? So this is a property. So we have a property of name, which is a getter and setter, which we define there. But we do hold, however, an attribute of underscore name. And this attribute of underscore name is being created through our setter right here. All right. Does anyone have any questions about the difference between attributes and properties and how I went ahead and created the school class?
I have a question more about the setter and the getter.
Yeah,
Will you
let's.
ever need just one of those, or are those always together?
Um, so the question was, will I ever need anything? Will I always need both a getter and a setter? And the answer to that is no. Sometimes you may only need a getter, but not a setter. That could be a specific edge case between that. But if you ever find yourself needing a setter, that means you also need a getter, right? So it's possible to only need a getter and not a setter. It is not possible to only need a setter. You need both a getter and a setter if you need a setter. Does that answer your question, Erica?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions?
What about in the scenario of like inheritance? If you have an attribute from like a parent folder, will it sometimes default to like the getter or setter for that prior folder? So then, does that make sense? Like, are there scenarios where you're only doing setters at least in one file just in order to change things with the setter and not everything is on that file if it's inherited?
Yes, that is a case, right? But
Okay.
keep in mind, you still have a getter for that class that's inheriting is
Yeah, okay.
the one that it inherited, right? You're utilizing polymorphism to change the setter, but you still have both a getter and a setter.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Of course. All right. So now we have our name, we have our menu. Our menu has been created. Now we can change our menu to self.name, and then we'll worry about this welcome Richard later on. All right. Now let's go ahead and actually create a runner here. This runner is going to be run the menu. It is going to take in self. And what it's going to do is it's going to say while, or let's take some input, some selection is equal to input. And here we're going to pass in the menu that we had established. We could say while selection is not equal to 5, it looks like. Then we're going to actually conduct whatever is in the while loop. Otherwise, or once it breaks out, we're just going to print a or return a thank you for using the school interface. And that's going to kill our function. All right. So in my while loop, it looks like the things that I'll be able to do will be as follow. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this and bring it down so that I have it easily accessible. So in the case where the selection is equal to 1, then I am going to print to list all students. If the selection is equal to 2, then I'll go ahead and print view individual student by ID. If the selection is equal to 3, then I'll go ahead and print add a student. Finally, if the selection is equal to 4, I can go ahead and print remove a student by ID. Ooh. And my else statement here would just print something along the lines of wrong input. All right, so I'm accounting for the user messing this up as well. Let's try this out. Let's go ahead and run the menu. So I'm going to run Python main.py, or excuse me, runner.py. Now, before I execute this, what do we think is going to happen when I execute the script?
Is it gonna fail because you have a 1 that you're passing into the school class?
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. This should fail, and it should tell me that what I'm trying to pass in is not a string and annotate that for me. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, so it tells me self.name is equal to name. Name value should be a string. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and run something like Regiment or Richmond High. And now we run it, and it's actually able to print Ridgemont High School interface. Here it is. Welcome to Ridgemont High School interface. Here's the list. Please make your selection. All right, perfect. If I do 1, it's going into a infinite loop. Okay, so let's go ahead and kill that before it continues going forward. Now that infinite loop is to be expected. Oh, there we go. And that's to be expected because we're never resetting the value of this selection.
I have
Let's
a
see.
question.
Yeah, go for it.
Why not use what's it called, match case instead of a bunch of if else statements?
I could use a match case. There's not necessarily a preference for one or the other. I think it's just whichever one you would like to choose. Does that answer your question, Alex?
Yes.
Awesome. And I think that answered my question as well. Let's go ahead and write a bunch of else's here because these should all be elifs. And when I make my selection, it should continuously run into a while loop again, right? Because selection is never going to be equal to 5. I'm not giving myself an option to make a new selection. Let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to go ahead and do selection is equal to input self.menu. That way, every single time I make a selection, I get to choose all over again. Okay, so I run my runner. I go ahead and say 1. We can see here list all students. If I run 2, we get view student by individual. We can see it working for every single one of them. And when I click 5, it exits just like I wanted it to. Now, if I type in a bunch of gibberish, it should tell me wrong input. Awesome. So my terminal application is working well up to now. All right. So now let's go ahead and fix our class of school because it does have properties, but it also holds a method where my method is actually returning the value of a string. And this is strictly just for me. There's no language reinforcement. This is just letting me know what's being accepted and how that's going to get manipulated here. All right. So let me go ahead and copy and paste this because now we also hold instance methods, where the instance method that we have is run the menu. All right. Does anyone have any questions about my school class up to this point? Perfect. It doesn't seem like we have any questions, so let's go ahead and dive into our student. And I'm going to build this student side by side. That way I could actually work through this. Let's see. So here's my student, and here's the information that I'm receiving from the CSV file. I can go ahead and start making all of these attributes, right? I can make my class of student, where my class of student will have an init method that takes in self, name, age, role, school ID, and let's see what else here. And password. Okay. Now it's just the process of assigning all of this. So we say self.name is equal to name. We can say self.age is equal to age. Self.role is equal to role. Self.school ID is equal to school ID. And I believe there's one more, which is password. And self.password is equal to password. All right, so that should be able to generate all of my students. Now, when I generate all of these students, I'm probably going to have to load them from a CSV. Now, all of these, are these attributes or properties?
Attributes?
Nice. Yeah, they're all attributes because they're not getters and setters, right? If we wanted to go ahead and set getters and setters for every single one of them, we can. Specifically, I think age is something that we should worry about just to make sure that it's handled as an integer. Everything else could be handled as a string. So let's go ahead and create a getter and setter for that. So I'm going to do property, age, which is going to return self._age. And then we could have age, where we are going to make sure that age is an integer. And we're also going to make sure that age is greater than 0 and it's less than 100. Otherwise, we want to raise a value error that would state age must be an integer greater than 0 and less than 100. If this works, then I'll go ahead and make self._age equal to age, or excuse me, value. All right, now let's take a look at this class for composition purposes. There, we can go ahead and open this up as well. I'm gonna grab both of these inner boxes here. And let's take a look at them. I have a considerable amount of more attributes than my class of school. I don't have a menu, but I do have a name. I don't have age as an attribute. What would be my attribute here? Let me pass this one off to Liz. And you're muted in case you said something.
I'm not sure.
All right, awesome. So if we take a look here, right, this self.age equals is actually triggering our setter, and our setter is creating an attribute here. So what would be the attribute?
Age.
It would be underscore age, right? Awesome. So let's go ahead and add that in there. So we do have the attribute of underscore age. We have the attribute of role, the attribute of school ID, and the attribute of password. Now, properties wise, we don't have a property for name, but what property do we have? And let me pass this one off to Brandon.
Uh, that is the age, right?
Yes. So that would
This
be
age.
8. That is
Yeah.
our getter and setter. All right. So now I've created both of these classes. But currently I'm not able to load any sort of data. So I can make a method that will be able to load data. I can make it at the class level, which is for school, or I can make it at the student level. Ideally, any sort of loading functionality should, especially when it deals with data, it should be at the parent, right? So the parent should have a load data method. So let's put and run into that. So my school is going to need students. We know that. So I'm going to say from classes dot student import student. And now I'm going to go ahead and run through this by creating my method. So I'm going to do def load data. This is going to take in self because it is an instance method. And it's going to take path to CSV. This should be a string. And what it's going to return will be a list of students. All right. I can go ahead and make my answer be equal to a list. And now I could utilize CSV and say import CSV. We go through the process of opening. So with open, I want to open the path to CSV, open it in a reading convention. I'm going to say this CSV file. I can say that my reader is equal to CSV.dictReader, which is going to take in my CSV file. And finally, I can iterate through each row. So for row in reader, I want to print out row. Now I want this to happen every time a school is initialized. Right? When a school becomes initialized, it should also load the data of my students. So I'm going to do this here. And for now, let's go ahead and return my answer, just so that there's a return value. I'm going to add an attribute here called self.students. which will load all the students in the school. And I'm going to set this to self.load data, where the path to the CSV file will be in data students.csv. So I'm going to go ahead and add my attribute here and name this students. Okay, let's run our runner one more time. When I run the Python runner, that load data was triggered because in the runner, we created an instance of Ridgemont. And the moment this instance is created, in my init method, I'm calling the load data function. That load data function is taken in the path to the CSV, iterating as a dictionary, and then printing each row to the terminal. And that's what we're seeing here. Does anyone have any questions over how we accomplished the reading of a CSV file? This part's really important. I can't stress it enough. All right. Doesn't seem like we have any questions. So let's go ahead and keep pushing forward here. Now, I want my answer to append this row, but I actually want to append it as an instance of a student. So I'm going to say student star star row so that everything gets added in there. And then finally, I'm just going to go ahead and print my answer. So we can go ahead and see what this looks like. All right, and maybe instead of answer, we should probably call this data list. That makes more sense. All right. Now let's go ahead and execute this. And I'm seeing quite a bit of errors here. These errors are coming where it's saying, hey, H must be an integer. Well, let's take a look at the CSV file. According to the CSV file, H is in fact an integer. So what could be going wrong? Let's see. Let's try to actually print this row. Let's print row. And I run it one more time. So if I take a look at print that row, what value is set under H?
With the string value.
Yeah, it's actually a string, right? Even though it's an integer, it is still a string. So I have to make sure I do a little bit of data conversion here, where I'll say row at age is equal to integer row dot get age.
Quick,
All right.
I have a quick question on that.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So the issue for why it was not running was because it was set as a value, or age was a value and not an integer. Is that right?
Age was a string and not
Age,
an.
okay, and it's okay. Thank you.
Of course. All right. So now when I run this, okay, we're still seeing a little bit of an issue here where it's telling me age isn't working correctly. I wonder what's going on now. Let's go ahead and print row so that we could see what's happening. Okay, so age is definitely set to 25. But for some reason, my raise value error is coming up. So there's something wrong that I did here. So let's comment out some of this information so that we could see which one of these statements is triggering it. I'm assuming it's the first one.
Because I was reading about errors yesterday. Because for the first one, would it be like because one's like a value, and then the others, when I was like reading about exceptions and all the like one would be a type error and one would be a value error. Would that matter?
It does matter. In this case, we're putting it at value error because we're trying to set a value to an attribute.
Yeah, for that one, but then the first portion
The is
of
instance.
uh yeah, for the first I guess I'm confused. I thought is instance right there is trying to set it to a string. I'm confused. Never mind. Sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. I apologize. If it comes up again, please let me know. All right, let me run this really quick. Okay, so it seems like this is the issue, right? Where we're asking for 0 to be, it seems like this is the actual statement that's causing the error. So let's go ahead and do this portion. Let me rewrite this. I know there's a shorthand way that I can write that, but I'm not going to try to explore that right now. I'm going to simply state if value is less than 0 or if value is greater than 100. And now let's load it. Okay, so this seems to have worked pretty well up until it reached this row in specific, where we're turning all of them into integers. So we got all the way to Doug, but then after Doug, it failed. So that tells me that my CSV probably has an empty line that it's not supposed to read. There it is. Had to do a little bit of CSV cleanup. That was my issue. And now everything is working. All right, and if I take a look at this print statement, I'm seeing a list of class instances. All right, and that list of class instances is happening here. Awesome. So I'm loading my data, I'm turning it into an integer, I'm then grabbing that dictionary, which is coming in row, and turning it into a class instance before I append it to my data list. This data list is returned, and it turns into my list of data here in self.students. So self.students ends up holding a list of student objects. All right. Here we have a string and then menu, which we know is a string. All right. Now there's got to be a cleaner way for me to be able to view every student. What would be a way that I can change this information so that when I view a student inside of this list, I can actually see maybe the student's name and what kind of class we have? How can I set that up?
Yeah, dunder rep.
Yeah, I could do a representation method. Great. So I'm going to go to my student class and I'm going to add a representation method where I have self and I simply return an F string stating class, student, and I think name and age will be enough. Let's do self.name. And actually, the school ID should be unique. So let's do school ID. All right. Let's run this one more time. Did I take off my print statement? Yes, I did. Why wouldn't I? All right, and now we can see the class of student along with their IDs. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and pause here. Does anyone have any questions over how we activated this load student data or this load data function?
Is there a reason that you chose to do the load data in the school for the students instead of in the student class?
Yes. Typically, I don't want a student to be able to create other students. So I could have made it a class method, absolutely. But if I'm thinking about it from a structural perspective, the school is the parent, right? And the school is going to have both staff and students. So the school should be able to load data for both the staff and students. Does that answer your question, Erica?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right. Okay, awesome. So now we have all of our students. We're able to hold them. I can go ahead and refactor this a little bit because we have added some information here. All right. For example, not only do I have properties now, but now I have an instance method where my instance method is the representation method. Inside of my class. All right. Now I'm able to hold everything. I can make a direct connection now. Let's see here. I don't like how this arrow is not actually pointing there. So I'm going to draw it out. Please don't judge my drawings. Okay, so students connects directly to the class of student. Perfect. Well, now we can take a look at our menu and actually start working through some functionality. So here I have my list all students. Okay, so my list all students should be a instance level method. And def list all students. That should do the following. It should go self. It should say for stud in self dot students print stud. And then I could call it within my menu. And I could say self dot list all students. Let's see what happens when I execute this. I run it and I press 1. Well, when I pass in the value of 1, this is what I get returned. A class of student at Lisa, Jesse, Slater, Kim. Now, I probably want something that shows me more than just that, right? I want to actually see some details in regards to Lisa, Jesse, or Slater, anybody who's inside of my current school. How could I change the way that this is being displayed when a specific instance is being referenced? Let me pass that one off to Jake.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm trying to change this print statement to be more detailed, all right? The current print statement that we have is being referenced to by the representation method. What other method could I utilize to overwrite the representation method when I'm calling on one specific instance rather than a nested instance?
I'm not sure.
Okay, let's go ahead and pass it off then. Alex, what do you think?
The one that makes sense. Would be a static.
Close. All right. Well, what I'm looking for here is going to be a string method. All right. So we would go ahead and add a string method. So def str, which takes in self and possibly returns something a little bit more formal and formatted. Right? Maybe we want to see something along the lines of, hey, let's have some lines here. Let's have some lines there. And maybe you want to see name, self.name. I want to see age, self.age. I don't necessarily care about role, but I do care about ID. And let's do self.id. Okay, so let's go ahead and rerun this functionality. I'm going to press on list all students. And when I go to list all students, well, now it's changed. Now we're listing all students with this nice handy dandy decorator. And we could easily identify all of the information of each student. Does anyone have any questions about the difference between the string method and the representation method? All right, it doesn't seem like we have any questions, so let's go ahead and continue running here. The next part is going to be viewing a student by individual ID. That's again going to come over to the school interface. I'm going to def view student by ID and run self. All right, so here we have something maybe like possible IDs, which is equal to stud dot school ID for stud and self dot students. All right, because self dot students is supposed to be a list of student instances. I can ask the user for their information, so selected ID is equal to input of please provide the student's ID. And I can say while selected ID, go ahead and do this portion. So if selected ID is not in possible IDs, then I want to restart the process, right? I want the user to restart. I'm going to say print these are the possible IDs. Please try again. And then I'm actually going to provide them with the possible IDs. And let me make sure this is an F string. Then I'm just going to simply return the same function here. Let's do return self dot view students by ID. All right. Now, if the ID is in there, I actually want to find the ID and return the appropriate student. So in the end, this function should return an instance of a student. So let's do that. Let's do for stud in self.students if stud.school ID is equal to the selected ID, then I'm going to return the stud. Otherwise, well, there shouldn't be an otherwise because we already handled the possibility where the student doesn't exist, right? All right. Let's go ahead and actually see it in practice. And then after we see it in practice, we'll go ahead and break down what we just did. Okay, clear my terminal here. Let's run the runner. And I never actually applied this method, so it's not going to work. I have to do it one more time. I apologize. Go ahead and do self.view student by ID. Perfect. So let's run it one more time. Here's my runner. It's currently being executed. I want to view or list all students. Here's all the students that are listed right now. Let's say I want to take a look at Lisa. I would say 2, which did not call my function. Oh, it did call my function. I just totally missed it. All right, so I pressed 2 and it says, please provide the student ID. I provided 2. That wasn't one of the possible IDs. It tells me, hey, these are the only IDs that exist. Please provide the student's ID. I'm going to do 1, 3, 3, 4, 5. And that returned a student, but it didn't print anything out, which that makes sense because I should probably actually print. All right, so let's go ahead and try that one more time. We go into 2, we paste the ID, and after pasting the ID, the information regarding Lisa populates. All right, so let's break that down. When I make the selection of 2, what is it that happens? Well, I make the selection of 2, and that sends me to view students by ID. View students by ID does not take in any sort of additional input. It is a method that doesn't take in any parameters and returns an instance of the student class. Notice how the possibility of it returning none isn't there. It will always return a student class. So in case we can't find it, there needs to be something that iterates through the loop or continuously reiterates this function, right? So we call the function. We grabbed all of the possible IDs and we asked the user to please provide the ID that they're looking for. In case the ID is not inside of possible IDs, then we're just simply going to restart. We're calling the function all over again and starting the function call from top to bottom. All right, so again, we grab the possible IDs, we ask for the input. In this case, our IDs are inside of the possible ID. So we iterate through each student one at a time, which currently we have a list of students inside of self.students. We're iterating one at a time and checking each student at ID. If the ID matches to the selected ID, let's say this third one is the one that matched, we grab said student and return him as the value. And that's where our print statement comes into play, because once a value is returned, we then print it to the console. Any questions over that view student ID method? Okay, let me go ahead and clear this. Let's open this up. I have a couple of other instance methods that I've just created. What are those other methods that I've created? I have 2 more methods that have been created outside of load data. What are they?
View student ID.
Okay, so view student, my ID. And what would be my other method that I've created?
Is it the list all students?
Perfect. And we have list all students. All right. So there's a little bit of changes that we've added on there. There is going to be an opportunity for polymorphism or inheritance here shortly, once we start working with the staff. But as of now, our next function is going to be to add a student and or remove a student. Now, before we dive into those, we're going to go ahead and take a nice break. Currently, right now, it is 2:27. Let's go ahead and take a nice 15-minute break and come back at 2:45 to continue on with the next part of our review. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'll see everybody back in 15. All right. Now, we left off where we were able to grab a student by ID. The easiest way to move from here is to be able to remove a student by ID. All right, so for removing a student by ID, we probably just want to, I don't think we want to reinvent the wheel here of iterating through the student. All right, because it's already grabbing a student. We could probably remove the student by value. So let's see. Python remove item from list by value, not index. And that's going to give me the remove method. Okay, so the remove method is going to do the process. I already have a method for finding a student by ID. So the easiest way to implement this would be as follows. So stud is equal to self.viewStudent by ID. That's going to return the student itself. So I guess I should change this to get student by ID and then just print it out. That makes more sense. All right, just following some naming conventions there. This should be get student by ID. After I get the student, I want to delete it from the current array. So I should maybe do a print message stating, hey, I will be removing stud dot name from student register or registry. That makes sense, right? All right. Another part of actually removing them. Well, I would say self dot students dot remove, and that would remove the selected stud. All right, let's make sure that process actually works. I'm going to take this ID here. Now let's go ahead and run 5 and clear it. Okay, so Python runner.py. There's my school. I want to remove a student by ID. It's going to ask me to provide an ID. I want to remove Lisa. Okay, removing Lisa from the student registry. If I view all students now, we can see that Lisa is nowhere to be found. All right. Where originally Lisa was our very first entry. If I try to view a student by ID and I provide Lisa's ID, it's going to be an invalid entry. It's going to tell me, hey, this ID is no longer valid. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and provide the following, and then we're able to find Jesse. All right, so removing a student by ID actually worked as well. Excuse me. Does anyone have any questions regarding this removing student by ID method?
Where did you ask for the input for them to give you the idea?
Yeah, that's going to be in get student by ID. It's happening here.
Hmm.
All right, in get student by ID, I asked for the input.
Oh, okay, gotcha. That's why you copied it. Okay, that makes sense.
Awesome. All right. So now I'm not repeating any code. I have my methods for getting student by ID, and one of them I'm just printing the actual student because it's returning the student value. And the other I'm removing and running some logic there. All right. All right. Now the final portion here would be adding a student. And adding a student might be a little bit more difficult than we expected. Let's go ahead and talk as to what adding a student may look like. Now, a student has name, age, role, etc. But we do have a limiter for my age, which I have to make sure is enforced. Let's start working through these methods. So I'm going to have a method named create student dictionary, which is going to take in self. And what this is going to do is return a dictionary. And we're just going to do student data. Now the student data should look as follows, where we are taking in all of the attributes that we are expecting. So name would be the input of provide student name. we then go into, we want to make sure we receive the role. Actually, we don't have to worry about role because the role will always be student in this case. So I can actually set that as a default value. We'll go into that here shortly. I can pass in a school ID if I don't want it to be automatically generated. And I could pass in a password. Now we get to the tricky part. And well, what about age? Age requires some additional information. All right, we want to make sure that it's typecasted into an integer. So how do I do that? Well, we could have an additional method named capture age, where this capture age does this same exact functionality here. So I can say input age, or I would call it age input. I could say if not age input dot is numeric. I think there's one that's called is digit. There you go. So if it is not a digit, then I want to print, please input a integer value, and I can return the captured age function to keep them stuck in a loop. And otherwise, I can return integer age input. This way I can make sure that the age is always captured and considered as an integer. So I would just call the capture age function there.
For the age, couldn't you just wrap the input in an integer
I
or
could,
something?
yeah, I could. But if I wrap the input into an integer and let's say they write it out, the input that they provide is something like 20. If I wrap this inside of a cast conversion to integer, this is going to raise an exception,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Going to
Yeah.
cause an error. So I want to make sure that the string that I'm receiving is like this.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. All right. So now it's able to grab all of my information. I'm able to set my school ID. And then as we discussed, we want to change this so that the role has a default value. We could say, hey, role is going to be equal to student. That way it's defaulted every single time. And I don't have to write it myself. All right, so this creates my student data or my student dictionary. Now all I have to do is actually create a student. So add student. This is a method that's going to take in self. I'm going to grab my student data from self.create student dictionary. Once I have that data, I'm going to create a new student instance. Which should have the student data. And then from there, I can say self.students.append new student. And I forgot to return a value here. So return student data. All right. Let's actually call this method of add students now. This should happen here. And maybe we could add a success message as well once it's been added. Let's do something like print new student dot name has been added. go ahead and run this runner. I want to list all of my available students. Great, all of my available students are there. And I want to add a new one. This new one is going to be named Francisco. My age, let's put a bunch of gibberish. All right, hey, this has to be an integer, so don't mess this up. Let's do 20. This has to be an integer. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and place in 20. Great. My school ID, let's do FR. And my password, we'll go ahead and do FR. And I get, hey, Francisco has been added. Well, let's list all of the students now. Well, now that very last value of the students, you can see that it's Francisco at age 20 with the ID of FR. Let's say I want to remove Francisco now. Well, I'm going to go ahead and do 4. It's asking for my ID. My ID is FR. And I get removing Francisco from the student registry. And now if I list all of them, Francisco has been removed from the registry. Finally, I can quit. And that's my entire school interface there. All right. Does anyone have any questions over the adding a student method or the creating a student dictionary method? All right. Doesn't seem like we have any questions. So let's start talking about the staff class because the
Actually,
staff class.
just for the adding and removing from a CSV, it does seem to make sense where it's like removing would be more simplistic and in that you just remove whatever the entry is, but then obviously putting stuff into something, you have to worry about formatting issues and all the such. What about when it comes to like if they don't input one of the 5 things, is there ways to like, well, you could always, I guess, force them to input something, but what if it just didn't make sense for some data fields for them to input? Is there a way to make it still work?
Yeah, if you want there to be the ability for some of them to be empty, you just have to make sure that you give a default value here of none. Right. So if nothing is passed, then that one specific data structure would be valued as none.
Oh, right. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at our not school, sorry, our staff. We currently don't have staff, which makes sense. Let's go into classes and do staff.py. All right, so our staff is going to look very similar to students. If we take a look at staff versus students, they look almost exactly the same. They have name, age, role, an employee ID instead of a school ID, and a password. But everything else looks exactly the same. All right. So I just need to change this, right? I could utilize quite a bit of inheritance between the two, with the exception of employee ID being a unique attribute versus school ID. That's the only difference between the two. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to make my class of staff, which should look very similar to the following. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this good old copy and paste there. All right, so we have age, we have all of the setters and getters, and we know that the only difference between the two, one, we can't set role to a default value because they are not all the same. They could be different. And two, the school ID is actually employee ID. Well, wait a minute. If they're exactly the same, this is actually going to violate what kind of principle?
Rewriting code.
Yeah, the don't repeat yourself, right? Don't repeat yourself principle, where I'm rewriting the same amount of code. So how do we fix that? Well, we fix that with inheritance. All right. Let's go ahead and make a new class here. And let's call this the people class. where my people class, again, is going to look very similar to the student with a couple of exceptions. My people class will not have an employee ID. Did I change this to employee ID on the wrong file? Yes, I did. Fantastic. All right, we'll fix that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and take off this employee ID because that is not common across both of them. That means that my string method is not going to be the same for both of them. All right. My representation method does seem to work. I can change this to people, right? And I can make this a class of people. All right. And we could probably remove this school ID. All right. And our age getter and setter will remain the same. Now, what does that mean in regards to student? Well, that means that I could do from classes dot people. I want to import people. I want to inherit from the people class. I don't need password because I already established it on the right-hand side. I don't need any of this. Instead, I would call super, where the super would call the initializer method of people and pass in name, age, password, and role. All right. Where role, in this case, the default would be of student, because we could do that in the student class. And I just realized I'm inside of staff.
Yeah,
So
and stuff.
let me go ahead and change that really quick. We do need role. All right, so there's all of our employee ID. We return this information, which is my string method. That's great. I don't need to overwrite my representation method, but I definitely could if I wanted to be more definitive. If instead of showing people, I want to demonstrate, hey, this is a staff member and this is their employee ID, I could. But I don't need these getters and setters anymore. Right? So that really cleans up my staff class. And if I want to do the same thing to my student class, well, I could. Again, I'm not going to need these getters and setters. I already have my school ID in both my representation and string method. I will need a school ID, but I don't need a role or name, nor do I need a password. Instead, this should just be super dot init, where I pass in name, age, and it might be a good idea to actually inherit something. So let's go ahead and do from classes dot people, import people. So we're passing name, age, the password, and the role. Now my student class looks a lot cleaner. My people class is carrying all the getters and setter logic if I wanted to evaluate and write some more. And I could even load all of my staff. I can come over to my school.py and say, hey, I want to have self.staff, where my staff would be a list. Oh, excuse me. And I can bring self.classes.staff, import staff, would be a list of staff members. And I want to self.load data from data/students.csv. And actually, this would be staff.csv. Now, Is this it? Is this all I have to change? Or is there something else that I have to take into account?
Other than the menu not incorporating staff.
Okay, so there's the menu not incorporating staff, right? But I also want to take into account the fact that when we go to load data, take a look at data is casting the age, and by default, it's choosing student as the generator. So even though we're bringing in staff, it's still just utilizing student as the generator. Let's go ahead and write a separate thing that it could return. It could also return a list of staff. And I could have a is staff portion, which should be a Boolean. All right, so now I'm going to add a couple of defaults here that I'm going to turn into false. So by default, is staff is going to be false. Well, now instead of having this student, I can do selected class be equal to student if, or excuse me, we're going to make this equal to staff. If is staff, else it'll be student. And when we call the selected class, we're actually going to call it down here, where we'll call that row. Or we could even change the name of this from selected class to something that we're more familiar with, like CLS. All right. So there's a little bit of a converter we'll be able to choose. Now, when I go and apply it up above, and I'm handling staff, I should also pass true as my second argument for is staff. Now, there's quite a bit of refactoring, so I do expect this to fail when I run it, but let's see what happens. I'm going to run Python runner.py. Okay, so it seems like I got everything on the first try. Let's go ahead and list all students. Okay, we're actually able to list all students. I'm pretty surprised here. Let's go ahead and add a new menu option that will list all of our staff. And let's just go ahead and do this number. So we're going to do 6. We'll add an else statement for 5. And we'll call this one self.list all staff. All right, how do I create this list all staff method?
Could you copy the list student method?
Okay, so let's go ahead and say I copy it. And I change this from students to staff. What else would I change?
You could do for staff and self.staff.
Let's do for staff in self.staff.
And then print staff. Yeah.
And that would print the staff. All right. Let me go ahead and go to the staff here. And let's annotate that this is staff. Let's go to students and annotate that these are students. And now let's execute the runner. And so we go into the runner. I want to view all current students. Here are all the students. And I forgot to edit the menu, but I know that 5 will trigger this behavior. And 5 seems to run into a infinite while loop or an infinite loop. And that's happening from my runner, or excuse me, my school, because I forgot to add this new selection of input. Okay, so let's go ahead and add that there. We have our selection input, and let's change the menu to have this new option. So this will be 6 quit, and this is view all staff. We run 5. And here's all of the staff that are currently loaded from my CSV file. All right, so now we utilize inheritance and polymorphism. If we come over to my people class, people is being inherited to have the same getter and setter property across all of the classes that are inheriting from it. We're also inheriting a representation method, but then we're utilizing polymorphism to override it. Right, here's the polymorphism where we're rewriting the method of representation. Our class staff can stay nice and clean because we're inheriting all of the attributes from people, and so on. Our school class is essentially our runner. It grabs all of the data from staff and students, and it holds the menu. And it runs all of the logic for each one of the menu methods. All right. At this point, does anyone have any questions over how we completed this school exercise assignment? Okay, doesn't seem like we have any questions. With that said, I would like us to get a little bit more practice in, specifically in regards to getters and setters. So here's my question for you all. How would I actually create a getter and a setter for name? What would that look like?
Add property,
Okay, so we do add property.
def name, self,
All right, so we have def name self.
and then return self dot underscore name.
All right, awesome. And how do I create the setter for this? And let me pass this one off to Jake.
For reference, could you scroll down a little bit so I can see the age setter? Okay. Start with the name dot setter. Enter. Define def name. And then just put self dot underscore name, or just put self name.
Okay, so let's go ahead and call it new name so we don't get it confused with everything else, right? Okay, so we're receiving a new name. How do we check that this is a string? And then how do we ensure that it gets inputted without any blank spaces on the left and right hand side and in title format?
I'm not sure.
All right. Do you know how we would check if it's a string?
I'm trying to think. Can't think of it right now. I can see it, but I can't think of it.
All right. Yeah, no problem at all. So in this case, we would go ahead and do if is instance, and we want to check that new name is actually a string, right? So if it's not a string, we could raise a value error stating this or name must be a string. All right, and otherwise we would actually set self dot underscore name equal to new name dot strip. That would take off any of the left and right hand side spaces dot title, and that would set it to a title. All right, so now we have our getter and setter for name. Now, how do I create a getter and setter for the role? Let me go ahead and pass this one off to Liz. How could I make a getter for role?
Pretty much you could just copy and paste the add property for name and just switch name to role.
Okay, so we're gonna do role self, and then we can return self dot underscore role. All right, awesome. And now I'm gonna do my setter. Let's do role dot setter, which is gonna be def role that takes in self and a value. And let's do pass. How do we want to handle a role?
Um,
We could have a list with the known, roles that are available in the school.
Okay, nice. So currently there's student, which is one of the roles, right? So let's go ahead and bring this over to the people class. And let me go ahead and do a constant here of acceptable roles, which we just said student would be one of them, which I need to change that here to student. There you go. Okay, let's take a look at our other CSV here, which is our staff. Okay, we have principal, janitor, teacher, and so on. Let's go ahead and put that side by side so we could easily see it. We have principal. We have janitor. We have teacher. And then principal. All right, so we don't need to worry about principal again. There's all of our acceptable roles as of now. So how do I go about building the rest of the setter here? I want to make sure that whatever value is being passed in can actually be found within these acceptable roles. What would be the next step, Calvin?
And the setter would need a filter, make sure that all of them are part of the class attributes that we're providing on the list. So anything outside of it will not get filtered down.
Okay, got it. So you're saying to check if the value is
See,
in.
yeah.
Okay, got it. Self dot acceptable roles. Now this works, but we do got to be careful with capitalization and everything that goes in here. So just for simplicity, I'm going to go ahead and title this as well. All right. So if it is in acceptable roles, then we just self dot underscore role equal to the value. And if it's not, what would we want to do?
Raise exception.
Yeah. And if it's not, I could raise a value error stating this, or excuse me, role must be one of, and then here we could go ahead and pass in an F string stating self dot acceptable roles. All right. So there's everything for role. And then password we'll go ahead and leave alone because we want to make sure that we can accept as much or the difference of characters and passwords. And honestly, passwords can get very complicated, especially if we're not utilizing something like regex and so on. All right, now all of these getters and setters have been created. And if we take a look at our drawing here, which we currently don't have, we now have a class of student that looks very similar, if not exactly the same. Or excuse me, a class of staff that looks very similar, if not exactly the same as student. But we also have this, and actually, let's do it this way. Class of people. Right, if we put this side by side, my class of people holds the attribute for name, age, or excuse me, actually we have an attribute of underscore name. We have an attribute of underscore role. We don't have school ID. And we also have a password. For properties, we have name, age, role. And for methods, I think we only have the representation method. Great. So there is everything that goes into my class of people. Now, when we're thinking about the class of staff, let me bring that up here. Now, class of staff looks a bit different now. And I say this in the reference that class of staff is now absorbing because we're inheriting, right? It is now absorbing all of class of people, meaning that we have all of the attributes that are here, including school ID. We have all of the same properties, and we have a representation method along with an instance, or excuse me, a string method, which are created within the class of staff. And I apologize, this is an employee ID. Right, so this is being inherited. And the same could be said for the class of student. Where the class of student also holds all of people's attributes, properties, and methods. But it doesn't hold an employee ID. It holds a student ID. Right, so if I'm taking a look at this from a hierarchy perspective, my class of people has been inherited by the class of student and the class of staff. Finally, my school, which is here on the right-hand side, and holds a variety of methods, holds a relationship through composition because this is a has a relationship, not an is a relationship. To both students and staff. All right. Does anyone have any questions about the structure of this project? Okay, doesn't seem like we have any questions. Again, this is our opportunity to ask any questions regarding OOP, getters and setters, methods, all together.
I had a question about the super method. If you didn't want to inherit one of the attributes from the parent, could you exclude it from what you're putting into super?
That's a great question. And the answer to the question is no, you cannot. All right.
Okay.
So let's say that name has a role. And let's say I didn't want to inherit it from role and I want to create it within my student, right? I say, hey, self.role is equal to role and then exclude it from the super method, right?
Hmm.
Well, if I try to run this, and I've actually never tried it, but this is likely going to raise an error because the super method is expecting a value for role. And because I'm not passing it in, it's going to throw an error saying, hey, I'm not receiving any roles, so I can't assign anything here. Right? So role must be of student, et cetera, et cetera. And it can't be none. And what we're passing in right now is none. Does that answer your question, Erica?
Yes. What if you had set the default to none?
Inside of the people class,
Mm-hmm.
let's go ahead and do that. So I could set it to none, in which case it would work, right? Not because I'm not giving it the attribute. In this case, I'm utilizing polymorphism, right? Because I'm already making a self-dot role, but now I'm changing its value inside of my student class, right? You would still have to set it. It would still have to receive a value, even if the value is none, and then we would change its original value to polymorphism, right? But something would still get fed downward. Does that answer your question, Erica?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So in this case, it won't work because we have our setter. So we're actually going to see probably the same exact error due to our
Hmm.
setter. But if we didn't have our setter, it would work. All right. Any other questions? All right. Doesn't seem like we have any other questions. We can go ahead and stop the recording here.